Hello, welcome to South Korea. In the following presentation, we will provide you with an overview of South Korea using the Pestel model and concluding with a SWOT analysis of the country. The presentation is brought to you by Conrad, Pedro, Blake, and David. Now let's talk about the political context of South Korea. First of all, the political system of South Korea is based on a republic form of government with the president as chief of the state and prime minister as the head of government. The powers of the government are shared between the executive, legislature, and judiciary branches. Political freedom in South Korea has recently declined as shown on the table on the screen. The country held a score of 1.5 for the last 10 years until 2015 when it scored a 2 due to the increased intimidation of political opponents of the current president. However, despite the downward trend, the country still holds a free status in political freedom. Political rights are strong in South Korea according to the Political Rights Index found in the Freedom in the World report. The chart on the screen compares South Korea to the U.S. in terms of their political rights and clearly shows little difference. Now, South Korea's political stability compared to the U.S. is weak. However, when looking at it on the scale of negative 2.5 to positive 2.5, South Korea's political stability has been strong in the 5 recent years shown on the chart. The rule of law, on the other hand, ranks 81%, that is 10% less than the U.S., as represented by the 2 charts on the screen. It is considered to be weak yet effective. The judicial system is independent and efficient and upholds the rule of law effectively, but corruption continues to undermine confidence and trust in political institutions. Corruption in South Korea may present an obstacle for businesses in South Korea, but the government is actively taking steps to remedy issues. The country has a corruption perception index score of 56 out of 100 and ranks 37 out of 168, which is 51% better than the average. However, when compared to the U.S., South Korea is twice as corrupt. Now, moving on to South Korea's economic context. South Korea has a market economy that ranks 11th in the world. It is a well-developed country with a developed market and a high-income economy. Its total GDP is over 1.7 trillion, which is around 1.6% of the global GDP. South Korea's economy has charted steady, uninterrupted progress in economic freedom over the past 5 years as represented by the chart on the left. The USA's economic freedom, on the other hand, has recently been declining. Economic freedom in South Korea is mostly free with a score of 71.7, which is very close to that of the USA. It even surpasses the world average and the regional average scores, making South Korea attractive to many foreign investors. The GDP growth rate as represented by the chart has stayed pretty stable in recent years. When comparing the GDP growth rate of the U.S., it is evident that South Korea's growth rate is higher. This factor is a good indicator that the country's economy is indeed progressing. GDP per capita at PPP has been increasing at a constant rate in the last 3 years, and the inflation rate has halved since 2012, which is a good sign that South Korea's economy is stable and steadily growing. South Korea's currency exchange is much higher compared to other countries like Japan, Hong Kong, and India, making it an appealing country for foreign investors. The exchange rates presented on this chart are based on local currency units per U.S. dollar. Recent data on HDI of South Korea shows that it scores 0.89 as of 2014, which put the country in the very high human development category, almost as high as the U.S., as shown on the first chart. By looking at the data on the second chart, it demonstrates that South Korea is a well-developed country with a well-educated population. Now, moving on to the foreign direct investment. FDI is welcomed in South Korea with a strong combination of free markets, pro-industrial development policies, and excellent communication and transportation infrastructure. The graph presented on the screen actually shows that foreign direct investment has increased dramatically in 2016, exceeding that of the USA. With no minimum capital required, starting a business in South Korea is not overly burdensome. The country's dynamic private sector, sustained by a well-educated, hard-working labor force, continues to capitalize on its openness to global trade and investment. South Korea is actually the 10th largest trading company in terms of trade volumes of merchandises and services. The country is home to the world's leading brands such as Samsung, LG, Hyundai, and Kia. In conclusion, South Korea has developed an economy that has very low economic risk and low levels of political and financial system risk.
South Korea is located on the east end of Asia, on the southern Korean peninsula, as you can see here in this map. The capital of South Korea is Seoul, which is also indicated here on this map. The country of South Korea is located south of North Korea, who they commonly have feud with. Let's take a look at the demographics of South Korea. If you take a look at this graph, you can see some key differences in comparisons to South Korea and the United States. The biggest being that of the population the fertility rate and the population growth rate being huge differences between these two countries. South Korea having lower rates for both fertility and population growth and a lower population than the United States, only having a higher life expectancy. South Korea is known for its population density, which is more than 10 times the global average. It has a population density of 518 people per square kilometer. Now, compare that to the U.S., who has 35 people. That number is quite exponential. The largest city in South Korea is Seoul, and it has a population of 9.8 million people. Now let's take a look at a few of Hofstede's cultural dimensions compared to the United States. Just a few dimensions to look at that are major differences between the two countries. We have power distance, individualism, uncertainty avoidance, pragmatism, and indulgence. One of the largest of these dimensions, as you can see, is individualism. And this shows a key difference in the cultures between the United States and South Korea. South Korea being a much more collective culture, and the United States being focused much more on the individual.
South Korea's social analysis. High wages. South Korea has one of the highest wage levels in Asia. The minimum wage payable in South Korea is $3.84 per hour, $30.74 per day, $868.27 per month. This compared to the United States. The United States pays $7.25 per hour. Highly educated workforce. Over 97% of the labor force in South Korea possesses a college degree, while the United States only had 95.9% of their workforce possessed a college degree. Aging society. Due to the low fertility rate and high divorce rate, South Korea is now classed as one of the aging societies in the world. The population aged between 0 to 14 years comprised just 18% of the population. Above 65 years was more than 9%. Compared to the United States, the population of people over the age of 65 years was 14.3%. Low unemployment rate. The low unemployment rate in South Korea is one of the lowest in the world, which is mainly due to labor market reforms in the early 1990s. In 2014, it was only at 3.5% compared to the United States at 6.2%. South Korea technological analysis. South Korea Internet. With an online internet penetration of more than 80%, South Korea ranks as one of the most connected online markets in the world. The country boasts the highest amount of available Wi-Fi locations worldwide. South Korea has the fastest internet speed and is 4 times faster than the average United States. Research and development expenditure percent of GDP. South Korea has one of the fastest growing research and development expenditures in the world. In 2006, they spent 2.8% of their GDP on this, and it rose to 4.1% by 2014. In comparison to the United States, who only used 2.6% in 2006 and only grew to 2.8% by 2014.
When overviewing the environmental analysis of South Korea, there are quite a few strengths that can be attractive to potential investors, as well as challenges and risks to overcome. Korea has a temperate climate that adopts 4 distinctive seasons, and a rainfall that ranges between 1,400 to 1,500 mm per year on average over the last 10 years. As far as physical terrain is concerned, Korea has a terrain of hills and mountains throughout the entire country, with coastal plains in the western and southern regions of the country, with natural resources embedded in the hills and mountains. Some of the most harvested resources in the mountains and hills are coal, graphite, and lead. Natural resources are very limited, so they must import frequently. As far as farmland goes, percentage is very comparable to the United States of America, as the Koreans have 14.93% of arable land, or land that is capable of being plowed to grow crops, compared to the United States of America's arable land of 16.29%. As far as forestries go, previous ancestors of South Korea have cut down major portions of forests in their country, which has been a major cause of soil erosion and flooding in certain areas. Thankfully, through reforestation programs and firewood being a declining source of energy, the hills are starting to be covered with foliage over the last 30 years. Since then, South Korean government has a strong promotion of national parks and has much stricter government intervention to protect their environment. As you can see, South Korea is ranked 43rd out of 178 qualified countries, with an overall score of 63.79 out of 100. Over the last 10 years, South Korea's EPI ranking has increased over 7% and is still growing. They are now in the top 25% of the ranking system. To compare, the United States of America is the 61st ranking. Now then, let's break down the EPI.
As you can see, South Korea's EPI is very comparable to the United States in multiple categories, such as similar health or water sanitation. A key feature to note is air quality in South Korea. Scoring less than 30 points lower than the United States, South Korea's air quality is quite poor compared to the cleaner, less toxic air found in the United States. In fact, South Korea is ranked 166th out of 178 countries that are tested in EPI, whereas the United States is ranked 38th. On a positive for South Korea, they scored 19 points higher in fisheries and forests than the United States due to conservative rationing on excessive fishing and tearing down forest cover unnecessarily. South Korea also has excellent water treatment facilities and is highly ranked at 18th compared to the United States ranking of 36th. Lastly noted, we as Americans tend to be more energy efficient than South Korea, as the graph points out. This indicator reflects energy efficiency and also any trends in carbon intensity and CO2 emissions.
And now on to the legal analysis of South Korea. South Korea, or the Republic of Korea today, is a vibrant democracy shaped after the civil law system similar to the United States of America or Germany. They have 3 branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. They even have a constitutional court that keeps a check on government decisions and lawmaking. Speaking of lawmaking, their law systems are based on 6 different codes: their constitution, civil code, commercial code, the code of civil procedure, criminal code, and finally a code of criminal procedure. The system also has great tax policies that are very favorable, in which many major corporations worldwide choose to headquarters there. However, one of the biggest risks is IPR issues, or individual property rights, in South Korea. They have a system of first to file rather than first to commercial use, which leads to numerous stolen ideas and copyright infringement. Another major concern is the lack of judges. There's a shortage of judges due to strict law examinations leading to low rates of acceptance. Furthermore, many judges leave the public courts for private practice. To counter this, the South Korean government has implemented regulatory incentives that may attract investors to do business in South Korea.
Our first graph shows that the United States is more independent from public persuasion in its court systems, rather than South Korea judge systems that may be perceived as influenced as outside sources such as government, citizens, or firms. The next graph is great to see if you're a fan of fair trade. Thankfully, both of our home country and South Korea score high in BPI and are less likely to engage in bribes when conducting business. Looking at our CPI graph, it should be noted that South Korea is ranked 37th out of 168 and near the midpoint of being semi-corrupt rather than the United States, which is shown to be cleaner and less likely to be involved in corruption. Lastly, we have our OECD Anti-Bribery Convention that shows how active countries are against combating foreign bribery. The United States takes a higher stand and is active in enforcing foreign bribery as a crime, whereas South Korea is moderately active and may not be as strict as the United States.
Here we have the SWOT analysis for the country of South Korea, that being its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. As you can see in this chart, if we take a look at the strengths category, 2 highlights of this category are the highly educated workforce within the country and the high economic freedom. 97% of the labor force has a college education or vocational training background in South Korea. It is also ranked 27th in the world for economic freedom with a score of 71.7. If we take a look at the weaknesses, one of the major weaknesses of the country is its aging population. The median age for people in South Korea right now is 40 years old, and this age rises every year. The key opportunity in South Korea is the growing research and development. It has the fastest growth in R&D expenditures among OECD countries, and that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, a major threat with South Korea is the household debt, which is 145% of disposable incomes in the country. And of course, they have the ongoing threat of neighboring with North Korea, and that is always a concern within that country.
And this concludes our Pestel presentation of South Korea. We hope you enjoyed it.